Hey, I'm David Adelsheim. The story of Adelsheim Vineyard began in 1971. That was the year that Ginny and I decided to risk our life savings on a piece of property in Oregon's North Willamette Valley. Looking back now, we were one of just 10 families that made wine before 1980 from grapes planted on our properties in that region. To celebrate the 50th anniversary of what became our first vineyard, we wanted to tell our story. But we quickly realized that the only way to truly tell our story was to tell the stories of that entire first generation. Our winery team proposed an idea, a series of video conversations with the founders of those first 10 wineries and me. I loved it and set to work contacting my old friends. In each interview, we wanted to go beyond their widely known histories to discover who these people really were and what led them to build our uniquely collaborative, and at least from today's perspective, incredibly successful wine industry. This is our shared story. Chuck and Charley Coury came to Oregon around the same time as David Lett of the Eyrie Vineyards. Chuck and David had been at UC Davis during the 1962-63 school year and traveled together the next year in France. They shared a nursery planting near Corvallis and both purchased land for their vineyards. Chuck made wine under the Charles Coury Vineyards label starting in 1970, but in 1978 lost control of his business to a financial partner. Chuck and Charley died in 2004 and 2005. We interviewed their son, Charley, at David Hill Winery near Forest Grove on October 16, 2020. We sat in the midst of vines planted by his father in 1966 when Chuck and Charley owned this historic vineyard site. Charley, I can't tell you what a pleasure and actually an honor it is to be sitting with you at where you spent a fair number of years up in a house.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool to be able to do this. And obviously we can't speak to your parents. But what I was hoping we could do is use you as a stand-in a bit for understanding what brought Chuck and Charley ultimately to this house and to being part of the founding of the wine industry in Oregon. And obviously we can talk beyond that, but particularly, so where did both of them grow up? Two different places or?
Yeah. Well, I mean, what do they say? Good biography starts with your grandparents. My dad's father, my grandfather, had a green thumb. He was an artist by training and actually was an immigrant from Hungary. I was born in France, but was an immigrant from Hungary and worked in the lace design industry during the Depression in New York. And when my dad was 9, his parents divorced and his mother moved, he and his brother, to Southern California. He was born in Trenton, New Jersey, actually right next to the Limburg family. So when the child was kidnapped, they actually came to their house, the FBI. So that's another on Long Island. That's another story. But anyway, so he actually grew up from 9 on in Southern California. And my grandmother's story is his father followed them to be close to the kids and came to her one day and said, "Elise, if you want me to help you with the boys, you need to help me. You're a good business person." She was a banker's daughter. I want to start a floral business. And so she did the books, and he raised flowers and sold them on Wilshire Boulevard.
Wow.
Up until my dad was in college, actually. So I think my dad inherited that a little bit of the horticulture piece from my grandfather. He really had a green thumb, a better green thumb than my dad, actually. And then my mom, She was from the East Coast, was born in Columbus, was raised in Connecticut. But I don't know, she went, she was a nurse, went to Hawaii during the war as a nurse. And after the war, I don't know, she ended up on the kind of an adventurous lady, I guess. And, we'll get into what, so my dad, the story is, so my dad was, went to UCLA.
Right.
Because he, Southern California, and I asked him, well, what did you study in school? And he said, well, meteorology. I said, well, why meteorology? And he said, well, I was like a junior and I needed a major, and I walked out one day and I looked at the clouds, which I guess are unusual in Southern California, and decided I'll major in meteorology. That's what he told me. So I don't know if that's true, but so he got his degree in meteorology, and he was in the NROTC program, and so he went into the war in Korea. I didn't actually know he was a Korean vet my whole life until he was talking to my kids. Isn't that amazing?
Wow.
And he started telling these stories about the war that he never shared. I don't know if that's part of the experience of being a vet in war, but he just never, I had no clue. I thought he was just sailing around in a boat. So he got out of the Korean War and got a job for Julius Weil and Sons. I don't know how he got that job, but Julius and Weil Sons was really one of the top importers of very fine.
Were they based in L.A.?
No, they were in New York.
In New York, right?
Yeah, Julius Weil. He passed away actually not too long ago. It was a real, driver of degustation and the whole shtick, So they had like Bollinger champagne on his line card. They had dry sack sherry. They had B&B, Benedictine. They had Brewer whiskey. They had these really Beringer wines from Germany, very high end. And he called on, of course, all kinds of wine shops in Southern California. My father did once he got this job. But one of them was Lloyd's and Elwood. And Lloyd's and Elwood's in the 30s, 40s, and 50s was like the preeminent fine wine shop. This is where all the Hollywood stars went to get their fine, expensive wine. So my dad called on them, and he told me that he was talking with Mike Elwood, and the topic came up about not just selling wine, but growing wine. And that's, he said, is where he really started the genesis of his thinking. Well, it turns out that Mike Elwood had been challenged by a provider of wine, a California wine, that if you know so much about fine wine, why don't you go try make it yourself? So my dad never exactly credited Mike Elwood with this, but I think Mike Elwood
kind of put that
seed. I mean, my dad credited with him putting the seed, but Mike actually did it. Mike actually apparently did buy property in San Luis Obispo and actually tried making wine. Yeah, they made sherry, actually, is what their first shtick was. So apparently my mom and he started talking, and somewhere they were on some trip, and they just, let's do it. So he ended up quitting Julius Weil and Sons, and we moved to Sacramento so he could go to UC Davis. That would have been in 60 probably, 1960, where he started, enrolled, 60, 61. And in fact, Joel Myers were our neighbors right across the street. And so I met Joel when I was 4.
Wow, and he couldn't have been much older.
No, he's my age. He's like born like 3 days after I was. He's
a vineyard manager who's now an important vineyard manager, but was David Lett's first vineyard manager back in the day.
That's right. So it's all intertwined with relationships. And
so Chuck is going to Davis. Does he have a job on the side, or?
Well, my mom went back to work.
Okay.
She was a nurse, as I mentioned, and so she went back to work, and I think really supported the family. He did a little bit of selling for Julius Weil, but he was pretty down deep in his studies, actually. Because I don't think he had much science. I don't know what he had with an undergraduate degree in meteorology, but he probably had to take some courses on.
Yeah, you would think.
You would think. So he was pretty pretty engrossed in that. And then, of course, he, I think Winkler, Dr. Winkler and Amering, Winkler on the viticulture side, Amering on the wine side, as you know, had already given some thought about wine regions. You know, they had the 4 wine regions in California. And I suspect, again, I don't have real corroboration of this with my dad, but that just his background in meteorology, Winkler's got him thinking about, you know, varietal selection based on climate. And so...
Which was not a common thought in those days.
I know, it seems so common sense today, like, well, duh.
But you plant this variety in this climate, this variety in this climate.
Yeah, that was like, no, you go down to Lodi and you plant anything and everything, right? Who cares? You know, if it harvests in August, so much the better.
Right.
You know, you get it over
Not
with
much
earlier.
More vacation.
Yeah, right. Like, why you have to worry about the rain in October, right? And so, yeah, it seems so like matter of fact today, but it was actually pretty controversial back in the day when he came up with that idea. And one of the indexes that he got interested in was the Thornthwaite Evapotranspiration Potential Index. And it's a really clever idea. I'm not a technical guy, but it basically mimics a leaf, the evaporation of a leaf, because that tells you all kinds of things about humidity, day length, temperature, moisture, dryness. It's a very...
And when that evaporation is taking place.
That's right. Exactly. And so by doing that, using this rather simple coefficient, you could compare climates from different areas. And so he got into that. And again, I don't know exactly when he came up with this idea of the cold limit amelioration hypothesis. He never told me, but that was one of his thoughts or his ideas, that, golly, when you start looking at the grape varieties, they all seem to ripen at the end of September, in October, no matter what wine region you're in. Unlike California, where they, you know, Pinot Noir is going to ripen in August, and Cabernet in September. You know, it's because they're not. And so he started thinking about that sort of reality. And again, he had been exposed to all these fine wines in his days at Julius Weil. So he was pretty versed in European wine, which even in the 50s was not that common.
No.
So without Julius Weil, without exposure, so all these things were working together to help him come to some of these conclusions.
In 62, 63, your dad, David Lett, Bill Fuller, Werner Koblet, and perhaps others were in the Vitinology program at Davis.
That's right. There were 4. I think it was Philip Tagny who was the 4th. Yeah.
And I doubt. I mean, you were what, 5 at that time, or?
I was 6 and 7.
Yeah. So you probably were not privy to the conversations they were having.
No, unfortunately.
But is it your thinking that they were talking about Oregon at that time, or did that take a bit before they got there?
Yeah, I don't think they were talking about it then. I think that started happening after my dad went to Alsace.
Okay.
You want me to read the one section?
No, I want the whole thing.
Where did he say
so this is your father's master's thesis.
That's right.
At Davis.
At Davis.
This is the one that isn't the final version, though. This is the one that speaks to Oregon, is my understanding.
No, right? No, I don't think his thesis really did speak to Oregon. I mean, it was really talking about this idea of grapes ripening at the limit of their.
Got it.
And so he used because remember, what he needed to demonstrate this was to look at grapes in actuality in California and different wine regions. So Napa Valley had distinct plantings, and of course they tracked the climate.
3 different sets of degree days. So,
that's right. And so that was a research lab for him to talk about this thesis. And so he wasn't speculating on, should we grow elsewhere? He was just saying, this is a way to select varietals.
Got it.
So that was the real thrust. And then I think later, so he wanted to continue to study cool climate viticulture. So by then he was pretty convinced that ripening right up until was important, and that, he wanted to grow in French it's septentrional, which means northern climates, Alsace, Chablis, Champagne, Burgundy. He, for whatever reason, I don't know why he wasn't so interested in Cabernet Sauvignon. Don't know why, but he wanted to study cool climate viticulture. Maybe because he was a contrarian and California was warm, so he was going to do something that California wasn't famous for.
Right.
And so he got a scholarship to go study with Pierre Huguelin.
And who did that come from, do you know?
Well, he applied. I think Winkler probably helped, they helped him, and they had connections. So he got what is called in French a stagiaire, which is like
intern.
An intern fellowship for a year in Colmar, the Institut National de la Recherche Agronomique, is the INRA, is in Colmar, and they have other, but one of the big wine stations was there. It's a great story because, of course, they wanted to fill the position after World War II, but if they took any of the young men, it was who could apply of any of the vineyards, it was going to cause controversy. So Huguelin had grown up the Munster Valley, where grapes aren't grown, but where a lot of cheese. So he was studying. He was down in Montpellier, which was France's agricultural school, studying bovine technologies. And Gallet apparently tapped him on the shoulder somehow. I guess he was a promising student. Said, "You're going to be our next wine director. You're Alsatian. You speak Alsatian, but you're not involved with the wine industry." And so he pivoted.
Wow.
And he had to. That's how he got involved with the wine industry.
And he's got to have been. I mean, in '63 when you arrived.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just Chuck who took this position. The whole family went.
Yeah,
over.
the whole family went. Well, again, that's part of the interesting piece. My mom actually spoke very good French. She had studied in France as a girl. Her mother divorced, went to Europe with her new husband, stuck my mother in a French boarding school. And then after that, she went to École de Lake Champlain in Vermont during summer school. That was a French. So she was fluent in French. And so that was probably another help to get my dad over to France, because she was fluent in French.
The two boys as well.
Well, yeah, I did not speak French, and so they stuck me in a French school. I think I shared that with you, a story. We went back after my son was my son was studying French. I majored in French, and so we went to visit him while he was there, and we went back to Alsace, and I went back to the home where we had lived in this little village called Ribeauvillé, and met the people who we hadn't seen for 50 years. We were crying and hugging. It was really, really sweet. But the fellow at the where I connected had actually had the same grade school teacher, Mademoiselle Wintermantel, that I'd had. So little village, yeah. So our whole family went, yeah. It was quite a family adventure.
And there was evolution at that point in your father's thinking, because, and I don't mean to have you do mind reading or make up what he did, but when the family came back, I presume sort of in June-ish of '64, June, July, whatever, the first thing that your father did was, with his father, they came to Oregon, right?
Yeah, well, Dave Lett came to visit us.
Right.
He spent a month with us. Dad and he traveled quite a bit to Burgundy. I know they were gone quite a bit that period. It was over the 4th of July because they got a little tipsy and did a parade down the village, and all the kids were following them celebrate the 4th of July together. Anyway, and I think they were starting to talk about, where are we going to go? What are we going to do when we get back? Yeah, because in the fall of after we got back, we got back in August because I went back into school. My grandfather and my dad came up to Oregon to look for property in the fall of '64.
Specifically for vineyard property.
Yeah.
So,
and I think
somewhere between Davis and doing a thesis focused on Napa Valley and a year in Alsace, they were coming to Oregon.
Yes, and my dad told me, because I asked him, I'm like, why Oregon? He said, well, we were looking at the Thornthwaite maps. They even looked at Ohio, because my mom's family was from Ohio, but felt that Oregon had the closest synonym, if you will, to the climates of Burgundy and Chablis, Champagne, Oregon. Alsace, that they were interested in this cool climate viticulture. Why they didn't go to Crineros or why they didn't go to Mendocino. My dad was one of these guys who he kind of always went big. It's go big or go home kind of guys. So he ended up going home quite often.
Well,
baby steps he hadn't quite learned the power of baby steps, I would say.
Now I don't know which path to follow here. Yeah, no, but he. One of the things that you'd mentioned before is that he was kind of tired of California and kind of, in some ways, wanted to say, this other state has a climate that's closer to the classic wine regions.
Yeah. But of course there are areas in California. Sure. So why Oregon? I think I see this in my own philosophy of business. When if you were to peel back I'm a business owner, but one of the things that I find constantly driving me is differentiation. I'm just always looking for what the other guys aren't doing. I don't know why. And I think I got that from my dad. Because, California, anybody can do anything. California, let's do something different. That was an important theme in his life. His brewery thing, let's do something different, the microbrewery, he became a Gallican Rite priest. He couldn't just become an Orthodox priest. He had to become this. Anyway, I won't get into the technicality, but he was always looking for that contrarian different thing that sometimes didn't always work out for him.
Your father and grandfather come to Oregon.
Yeah.
Did they see this piece of property?
I don't. That's a great question I've pondered. I don't know. I think they did. As I recall, I think they did find it and started the process of coming together with some money. And, they didn't have any money.
Yeah, I was going to ask, coming together with money if you don't have it, what did they do?
They borrowed from friends and family to try to scrape it together. Yeah, they were. I think my mom's dad gave him the money to get us home from France. They were poor students.
Well, and particularly, yes, having just done, in essence, working for free for a year in Alsace.
Yeah. He got a little stipend, actually, from the French.
Oh, good.
A small fellowship. Yeah. Because my mom didn't work, so we were able to survive.
You arrive in Oregon sometime in '65?
Yeah, we moved to Oregon, to Forest Grove in the spring of '65 because I was pulled out of school and spent 2 months in the spring in Forest Grove. Yeah. And then the property, they were already looking at this property, but I don't know. I think it closed in the fall of '65, but the house was so run down. Maybe you'll get pictures of it that we couldn't move in. There was no windows. There were blackberries. It was pretty disaster. So we lived down in Forest Grove up until I think the summer of '66.
Chuck had brought some cuttings with him.
Yeah, Dave had a little thing, nursery that when Dave Lett came up, and then my dad had gotten some given him some to plant. There's the whole Coury clone story, which we might get into, coming over from Alsace. I think the story that I told you earlier, I think is I grew up with just so ingrained with climate is the key. Climate is the key. Sometimes I guess the disciples drink more deeply than the original master or whatever. I remember when I was studying winemaking in France, we went to Sancerre because the Huguelin had taken over directorship of a little teeny research center in Sancerre, which is over the hills from Burgundy to the west, at the head of the Orléans, the Loire River. And the soils there it's kind of a complicated soil area because they've got flinty soils and very chalk, these, what do they call Terre Blanche chalk in this little wine region of like 15 miles. And I remember distinctly the director of this research center, we went to this beautiful cellar, had the clerestory windows shining into with the French oak barrels, and there was all Sauvignon Blanc, as you helped me remember. And they were tasting and competing, and the proprietor was testing the research director, could he identify the soil? And that was like it was like a whole, almost existential crisis for me, because soil was not supposed to be important. I'd been so ingrained by my dad. I'm sure he didn't mean to. He wasn't against, goût de terroir, but I just remember growing up with this fervent commitment to this cause to prove out his thesis that, grapes that are ripened, and actually all fruit was his shtick, that ripen at the end of their growing season are going to have better organoleptic qualities than those that ripen quickly.
Right.
Yeah. So that was always, he was a bit of a cause person. I think, it wasn't just a business or even let's make wine. The idea of a cause was kind of an important element in his personality.
And I think you're bringing up what is in essence the central role of your father in the industry. Which is this cause. And how would you describe at least how you perceive that cause to be?
Well, I think that you could make, and first of all, it's his thesis, right, that varietal selection is best done relative to climate. Now, somebody might add soil to that, I don't know, but for him it was climate. And so could you, on a cause, create an industry? I don't know, that fascinated him, that idea. He was, I don't know, what you'd call him, altruistic? That's maybe not the right word, but I don't have the right word for that. So, I think that, where other people in the wine industry were maybe more practical to some extent, were more reasonable business people, because actually making wine is a business, right? Sorry, I know it's romantic, but you gotta make money or you go out of business. That's as a professor of mine once said, profits are not an option. So I think for him the cause was what kept him going, and I think maybe helped pave a way for others. You know him, you met him. He was sort of a preacher, kind of had his message.
No, I think for a lot of us, first of all, this was the confirmation that we weren't throwing our life away.
Yeah.
That there was some level of science behind this idea of planting grapes in the Willamette Valley. None of us have ever actually read it, but but we did. We had Chuck's dramatic reading,
Yeah.
if you
Yes.
will,
Yeah. Yeah.
of it. And in essence, David Lett's reflection on it, Bill Fuller's reflection on it, and interestingly, I mean, the Ponzis came here without knowing any of these people, but the first person they met was your dad.
Yeah.
And we met him pretty early after we started looking for land, and it was, I think, the most compelling piece. That and the idea that you could make wine, that a human being could make wine, that it was not big corporations or foreign corporations, but a human being in Oregon could make, at least theoretically, great wine.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think we can get that out pretty early, that your father was a difficult person for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Because he was a true believer, and he didn't tolerate fools very easily.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that negatively. I mean,
Well, no. I mean, my dad was an arrogant person. He acknowledged that in his more vulnerable moments. I think often arrogance is an over
compensation
for deep insecurity.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to psychoanalyze his parents and their problems and their issues, but I think my dad, that was part of his vulnerability, and so he could be. I mean, you would have had to meet his father.
I did. I met him at least once.
My grandfather could. You think my dad could skewer? You see his father. So yeah. So I think, and I think my dad. His conflict style was. Everyone has a different default conflict response. Some people avoid, his was to get competitive. If you push him, he's going to come back harder. He and I had a few of those in our relationship, as you can imagine. But we were very close. I don't know why. We just really, I don't know. We always got along really well. But he had some friends who were really loyal, and he could also burn up relationships really bad. Yeah. I think I wrote that to you. I've always appreciated Michael Novak, who is an author on business. He wrote a wonderful little book called Business is a Virtue. And he identifies 3 virtues of a business person. One is innovation. Well, my dad was an innovator, no question. The second is community building. Isn't that interesting that business people actually build community? They have to. Now, it's a different type of community than singing songs at church, but it's a real business. It's a real relationship, and commercial relationship. And the third is practical realism. I think my dad's weakness was this community building. He could blow up his relationships that are so important in business. They just are, And that was, I confess that was one of his besetting sins.
And I didn't mean to focus on that quite as much, but I do mean to come back to the 3 points. And if there's one thing that I remember Chuck for, it's for building the wine community.
Yeah. Ironically.
Yes. I mean, if he had problems one-to-one, he also understood that it wasn't about his success. And I mean, he is the one person who felt we needed to focus on clones, on research, on all these things, when everybody else was trying to make enough money to survive. And I mean, the irony and sadness is that he didn't make enough money and the business didn't survive.
Yeah.
His own business didn't, and yet the wine industry prospered and did so well because of the direction that he had a lot to do with.
Yeah, well, it is ironic. I spent my childhood being dragged off to the Wine Growers Association meetings.
At the fire station.
Wherever was being hosted with gallons, we wouldn't dare drink Gallo. That was verboten, but they was always drinking Almaden and with cheap wine.
C.K. Mandavi.
Yeah, that's right. So he was a real advocate for that community. I think my mom also really was a kind of a community builder. So yeah, we're all kind of paradox, aren't we? Everyone's a mixed bag. It's a peculiar, whereas his individual relationships could blow up, really go south. But generally, he was not a loner. He wanted to create a community.
I mean, we were at Fuller's, and he said he spent 6 months living here while he was looking for land.
Yeah, Bill lived with us for 6 months while he was looking for the land for Tualatin. Yeah.
And he woke up one morning, came out of his room, and there was a naked couple lying in the common area upstairs. That was a winemaker from California.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, well, Shane, and what's her name? Yeah, I remember that couple. They were kind of hippies. Yeah. Yeah. Well, people were coming and going. I mean, it was really fun place to grow up because there were people coming and going and all the time, exciting energy. Yeah. I remember the outside on the west of the building, he had old tubs from Oregon Fruit Products. Literally, that was our crusher. He got my friend and I, these junior high kids, literally crushing grapes, just like the French in the old days. That's how we crushed them. And then he had a press. He had made a little homemade press.
Well, and I remember when I came up here, I think it was with that first vintage, he offered to taste some of the wines that were being stored and being, I don't know what time of the year it was, and we literally went out to these plastic bins with big plastic bags in them that the wine was in, because literally you couldn't afford barrels in those days.
That's right.
And we tasted wine by opening up the bag and sucking some wine out with a tube from the bag of wine. Yeah. So you were growing up with this, and in '74, you kind of repeated what your father did in '63, '64. You went to Alsace.
That's right. I got, I had the same kind of fellowship with Dr. Huglin. Obviously I wasn't going for a master's degree, so my role was more humble than my dad. They threw me out into the vineyard to work and into the winery to work, as opposed to doing more.
And this was after you graduated from high school?
After high school, yeah. In fact, I spent 2 years in France. The second year I was in the Jura with a negociant named Henri Maire.
No kidding?
Yeah. And so...
He once came to Oregon.
Henri Maire? Yeah. I loved Henri Maire.
The old man, yeah.
What an amazing guy. He started... He was one of those few French people who loved all things American. I mean, he was an American file. Oh man, computers, he wanted to make a factory. He had a factory to make wine. I mean, he loved Gallo. I mean, he was just all things American. So that's pretty unusual, yeah. He was a wonderful person.
But when you undertook these 2 years, was it your fantasy that you would go back into wine?
Yeah. I was deeply ingrained. I mean, I was fascinated. I was learning a lot. I think one of the things that fascinated me about Alsace was how, to your point you made earlier, that actually normal people can make wine. Is, during that, I mean, you'd go to, I was dragged around by some of the technicians and so forth. These are guys who they've been making wine for 600 years in their family, right? They had the vineyard, they make it wine. I mean, it was nothing. It was more pretty down to earth. I really appreciated that about European winemaking. That was something that I really came to appreciate, how normal part it was of of life.
Had you sort of thought through what you were going to do after France?
Well, I was going to come back. I was going to go study, probably biology, to probably viticulture. I was going to go down that road. What happened was I ended up having a religious conversion. I came to Christ in November of that year, and ended up completely changing my direction. I have a degree in anthropology and linguistics because I became a missionary. And then, yeah. In fact, I remember visiting Henri Maire, and he just could not believe that I'd given up the wine business. I said, but Monsieur Maire, like, think of it, because in the day of Pentecost, the Holy Spirit comes down in the book of Acts, and they think they're drunk with wine. So it's, think of me as making spiritual wine. That didn't satisfy him very much. Anyway, I got completely out of the wine business and went a totally different direction with my life. Yeah. But the other thing, David, I wanted to say that didn't come up about my time in Alsace that we've talked about, because I was 17, turning 18, right out of high school, went off to France. My French was not very good. I'd skipped studying French in high school the last year and taken up photography for my elective, which was probably a big mistake. In fact, it was a mistake. So I was struggling with French, and I was very homesick. I don't know if you remember ever being homesick, but I remember it to this day. It's very painful. And you came to visit. It was the fall, maybe October.
I'd done my own, was a stagiaire in Burgundy and worked at the Lycée Viticole in Bonn. And for some reason, we were in touch, at least enough that you invited me to come. I'd never been to Alsace before. And I came over and took me to Ribeauvillé and to INRA and introduced me to Hugues. We talked about the clonal selection work that Hugues was involved with, or I don't know that it was his particular focus, but
he and Julien,
yeah. And I asked if they would be willing to share the clones, and they said some version of sure. And after I left and came back to the States, you were left with the job of rustling up cuttings from all these clones that Hugues had promised to send to Oregon State and sticking them in a package and sending them off with the stickers.
Yeah.
But having been in Burgundy for 2 months, it was helpful and zero English speaking in those days.
Yeah, not like today. Everybody speaks English in Europe, but they didn't then.
No.
Yeah.
So it was helpful to me to run into you, and we took a road trip up to the Palatinate in Germany.
Yep. You had a Volkswagen, I think, one of those station wagon Volkswagens. Yeah, I mean, on a personal level, it was really helpful for me. You were like a shot in the arm. I know we're talking about wine and everything, but just David at a personal level, I needed somebody, somebody from home at that particular junction in my young life. So you might not know how influential it was, but thank you. Yeah. But that brings me to your question. I mean, here's a bottle of your wine, David. I don't actually know how you got interested in wine yourself, even though we've traveled together. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, our interest was more like, let's say, the Ponzis or the Sokolblassers, in the sense that we had not done this. Ginny and my background were not in science, although I wasn't afraid of science. We first ran into Dick Erath, and then into Susan and Bill Sokolblasser, and just the idea that they were doing this, and that we met the Letts and possibly the Ponzis. I don't really even remember who came to this May Day party in '71, but we knew these people, and they were growing. They had planted vineyards. They were going to make wine. Soon enough, we tasted a bottle from David Lett, and it just seemed like this would be fun. It would be rewarding, and frankly, the idea of building an industry of value, which was inherited from your father, I think gave us something more than just playing. That gave us serious intent.
Yeah.
My father still thought we were fools, but it was enough for us. And even my father helped plant part of the vineyard. So but I really, although I had plenty of screaming fits with your father, not plenty, but certainly a few, I think it was this thesis and his vision to use what that taught to go to Oregon, and then this need for these people who had been attracted to Oregon to work together to build something, as opposed to what most people in most wine regions of the New World have done, which is you've got a bunch of wineries that barely talk to each other and nobody knows who they are.
Yeah. Yeah, it was very, you got to admit, it was very collegial. We were always having parties.
No,
It just seemed like I was being dragged off to one party after another. Right? I mean, it was true. You guys you had a good time.
We did a tasting in your living room of all the Pinot Noir wines we could find in November or December of 1973. And of course, around the same time, the cash needs, the financial needs of the winery drove your father to find a financial partner.
Yeah, one of his schemes for getting money was to start growing grapes for the fledgling Oregon industry, as you know. So he and Dick Erath got together.
Plants.
Yeah. Yeah, the nursery business, growing grape plants. And that didn't work out, but he had a big nursery in Southeast Portland. You were there. And then eventually they transferred it to here. And that was going to be their scheme. They had a big contract. In those days, you could, limited partnerships were a great tax haven. So some New Yorkers got together and wanted to invest in a limited partnership, plant a vineyard in near Salem, Eagle Crest.
Yes, the oils, yeah.
And so he got the contract to plant it, grow the grapes, plant it and everything. And he was, I don't know, it was just, there was a lot of grapes to grow because he also had other orders, and he was a month behind. And my dad this is where his community building skills failed him, because whatever he did, and hey, I'm in business, I work in New York. It's a tough crowd. New Yorkers, they can be tough. And they kind of fell out, and they ended up suing my dad. And they won. They actually won. He bet that he has a breach of contract because he was late a month. And it cost them like all their money. I mean, they didn't have any money anyway, but
yeah.
That's the
right.
It kind of sucked them dry. And they were in real trouble financially. I mean, they're always on the edge. I mean, they would buy, because by vocation, we'd buy one wooden window because it was plastic. So there was always a celebration we could buy a window and install it in the house, kind of one at a time. You know, and when you're a kid, you don't know that.
Right.
But in retrospect, they were really, every extra dollar they had to buy, one stainless steel barrel or one oak barrel, or that kind of problem. You know the story. I mean, it's a real challenge. I don't know how you guys, frankly.
Well, and it's one that we've heard 9 different or 10 different answers to. I mean, everybody had to solve this because nobody in this founding 10 wineries came loaded with cash.
Yes. And so what happened was, they're on the edge. And he ended up meeting David Teppola, who was a successful businessman. His family had been in the hardware business and was interested. I think he wanted to really always be in agriculture, but his family kind of set him down the road of being in the family business, but he was interested in grape growing, and so they ended up creating a partnership. And I worked for a gentleman who many years ago who got into financial difficulty and was forced to take on partners. And I don't know, I don't have a lot of data, but my sense of it is partnerships are fantastic. My business, I've been in partnership for 16 years. I have 3 partners. And it's a great experience. It's just a wonderful way to do business, if that's what you want and choose to start out with. But when you're sort of forced into it with a gun in your head, that's a hard pill to swallow. And I think in the case of my former boss, it didn't work out. And I think in the case of my dad, it's just, whether it's a humiliation, a humility problem, ego problem, it's your dream is being broken. I got other people pushing and shoving. I'm not my own boss anymore. And then with someone like my dad, you can imagine, pretty courageous of David Teppola, actually, in my opinion. I just think, I think it's courageous of anybody to rescue someone and force them into a partnership. I think it's better to buy them out. This is my business, just my limited business observation. But anyway, that's not what they did. And so they struggled. It struggled, and eventually it sort of fell apart. I think David was good to my dad, frankly, financially. In fact, it was that money that allowed them to start the Cartwright Brewing Company that they got out of the winery, out of the property. But I think David probably early on realized this is not going to work.
Well, Charlie, before we go on, I'm getting thirsty. I don't know about you.
Yes.
Okay, This is a new bottling, I think, from David Hill, new label certainly, and this is the Riesling vines that your father planted.
Yeah.
The 1919 vintage.
Yeah, great.
And obviously when your family left this place, the Teppolas took it on, and then...
That's right. I think it became Reuter Hill.
After the people who had it at the turn of the 19th century.
Yes, that's right. Because this had originally been pre-Prohibition, a vineyard. Yeah. I think that's part of the reason my dad and grandfather were interested in the property. Yeah, it had some background. Cheers.
Cheers indeed.
Yeah, so I was saying that this idea my dad sort of went, he was sort of the go big or go home. And so even when he started the Cartwright Brewing Company, instead of baby steps, sort of testing the concept of beer and how to filter it, do you filter, unfilter, all that, he went out and bought a big bottling line, had the vats for beer. I mean, he hadn't made a bottle of beer yet. So that was sort of kind of my dad's way with him. I think that, and certainly at times created problems. Yeah. Got way over his skis, as they say.
Yeah. So he didn't really make beer commercially, or only did it briefly?
Yeah, only briefly. But he had the vision of brew pubs. In those days you could not serve beer, right. And he had the vision. He saw the guy just, he was one of these alpha guys. Usually it's the beta guys who make the money, but the alpha guys are needed to kind of carve the way. That was my dad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when the brewery didn't work, did your mom and dad leave for California immediately?
Yeah. I think at that point, the sort of, business failure it's a weight on the soul. I mean, I think was he a broken man? I don't know if he was a broken man. There were other consolations. He had come to faith, so I think that was sort of an ironic twist in his journey. So he sort of started down that path, but I think he just needed to get out of Oregon. I think it was too painful. All those dreams, There's an old proverb, a Jewish proverb that goes, hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a desire realized is a tree of life. So they didn't get their desire realized, their dream. That is painful. Yeah, it was painful for him as a human being. Yeah.
Your dad found a number of things to make money over the years, but at some point, you told me that he made a visit back to Oregon.
Yeah. He came up because my wife and I and our children were living. We were back from being overseas. We were back in Oregon, and so he came up to visit us and decided he would make a trip around. And he saw Dave Lett, and they had a great talk. Interesting about the business realities. They talked about the dream and all that, but in the end, it was like, like we said earlier, you got to figure out how to make a profit, right? It's a cost of doing business, like paying the bills. And so it was funny. They ended up talking more on the business side. They'd had a falling out. Diana says it's because my dad was a conservative, and Dave had got politically, and Dave had become less enamored with the Vietnam War, and my dad was a vet, and so I think that that was kind of where that's the kind of thing my dad could get pretty bent out of shape over, and so that maybe was the presenting problem. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean,
and then he saw Bill Fuller.
Oh, good.
Dick Ponzi. Yeah, he made the rounds, saw the old crowd. Apparently he didn't see you.
He didn't see me, but
I don't know. Time was
who knows
time
where
was
I was,
limited.
and
Yeah. He only was.
Your dad and mom died in the late '90s. Am I remembering that? No, it was later than that.
2004. I think it was July 23rd. My dad passed away. Yeah, and he had lung cancer. He'd been a smoker in the Navy and a diabetic. So he died, and then my mom had a stroke. He had taken care of her, and then she passed away 9 months later. Brought her up to Oregon, and she passed away. Yeah. So. He died at 73, relatively young age. Yeah.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Everybody that we've interviewed, of course, mentions your dad. I think because of this, what we talked about earlier, his vision of us needing to create an industry, a community that would work together. And I don't know if he was a great collaborator, but he was a great instigator.
Yeah, that's actually great insight. I don't think he was a very good collaborator at all, but he was an instigator, a bit of a Pied Piper.
Yeah. And I mean, the whole idea that the industry needed research at Oregon State, and we needed to figure out a way to pay for it. And he came up with this sort of modification of a commodity commission where we would be taxed by the OLCC, $12.50. And this was in 1977. I mean, this is crazy early. And we were all paying $12.50 a ton so that we would have a fund of money to send to Oregon State. And I don't know that this was him alone. Certainly, I'm sure Ponzi and Erath and probably Sokol Blossers. I mean, I think a lot of us worked on that.
Yeah.
But it was the idea that we had to do this to be a serious industry was really Chuck's. And so there's that piece, and the Table Wine Research Advisory Board that became the Oregon Wine Advisory Board, which became the Oregon Wine Board, and now has a budget of $2 to $3 million a year, and is all an outgrowth of this idea that we needed to collaborate and help pay for the research that would give us a future together.
I mean, he could be, pretty academic. I mean, he thought that way. That was interesting. He could have been an engineer, actually. Maybe he had that bit of. He could think like an engineer. He's a good electrician. I remember. So yeah, that's sort of my dad. He wanted to help establish a legitimate industry that was not just also ran, but could stand on its own right up against California.
Yeah, and I think it's that think big idea.
Yeah.
that he certainly wanted for us, couldn't achieve for himself.
Yes.
And frankly, in those days, none of us individually could have achieved, because we were, if we had more money than Chuck, it was a penny or two. It was not much.
Yes.
And so the initiative for collaboration really, I think, came from your father. It fell into receptive hands, if you will.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that you think about the remarkable people that were the foundation of the Oregon wine industry. I mean, these are really sharp folks.
Yeah, and coming out of a whole set of universes, so that they, yeah.
Well, and this bottle was the first label, and this particular font or logo from Oregon came from
Word
Oregon.
art, even.
Yeah, came from Oregon Fruit Products. So my dad got a job with Oregon Fruit Products as a sales manager, and he got permission from Mark Gaylor, who was the owner of Oregon Fruit Products, to use the exact same logo on that. So that's how he did. So he used it, and that's how he came up. He just loved that Oregon label and decided he's going to put it. So Oregon, you can see it wasn't, Charles Coury's here, but it was Oregon. And his first label was Oregon.
Right. Yeah,
so that was pretty important for him to pitch Oregon. I mean, he was a pitchman for Oregon.
Yeah, he certainly was that. And
so,
these?
Yeah. So again, just, I think,
these are elaborations on that one?
New labels. Nothing with that big Oregon chutzpah. I think he decided to update what they thought was a more modern label.
Yeah.
But I think this is interesting that his first instinct was to just blast out Oregon. He was going to make a statement.
Yeah.
Pretty bold statement for a wine label when you really get down to it. Yeah.
But we had a blind wine tasting in which we tasted, anybody who had a Pinot Noir wine in a bottle could bring it to this tasting, and all we were tasting for was what clone was it made from.
Wow.
Well, I mean, we didn't know, but they would tell us, and we would compare. Let had Wadensville clones, and somebody had something from the Pomar clone. Your dad, I think, probably had something from 538, which probably is what the Coury selection is. But these Pomar clones were just round and juicy, and they were not too acidic or too tannic. They had a great name for the clone, Pomar.
Yeah.
And so starting the next year, we all wanted to buy Pomar clone to plant. And at that time, I was buying from your father, and we put in a couple of orders, and he fell behind, and he said, well, I've got this much for you, and we planted the upper block at Quarter Mile Lane Vineyard, but there weren't any plants for the lower block. That was okay. They were delivered in July, and we planted those. And eventually, when those grapevines started producing, they were very different. And the lower block tasted like Pomar, like what other people made that was from Pomar, but the upper block, not so much. And I asked your dad, where did you get these cuttings? And he told me some guy named Clementi, and I don't know if it was Central Valley or Sonoma or wherever. I called him up and said, what clone did you sell to Coury? And he said, clone? No, we sold him Pinot Noir.
No.
So we look at this 2.5 acre block in our vineyard, which is the only surviving block that does have some phylloxera, but is mostly still there, and say, we don't know what the clonal selection is, but boy, is it good. And boy, is it unique. It doesn't taste like anything from anybody.
Interesting.
But getting behind in a nursery is not a one-time problem, that's for sure. And it was, I think in some senses, your father wanted to supply grapes for everybody. Yes, it would make him money, that would be great, but just as importantly, it would help build the industry.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was a way to bootstrap. He wasn't trying to get rich off it. He was just trying to survive and keep it going. I don't know what shenanigans he played with the Coury clone. I never really got into that, whether, the suitcase cuttings, my aunt insisted he sent it through Berkeley, but that's not the story he's told Joel, my friend Joel Myers, so I suspect. I mean, I do know that Uglan, they were doing all that clonal work and said, this is the best Pinot I've got.
Right.
And
that would have been 538, I think.
Well, I think now that's got its own, 136. I think it's.
Yes, that's the national number. Right. But the Alsace number was 538.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So, why Uglan? So it's really Pierre Uglan who's the real. Not my dad. My dad was just a messenger in a way.
Right.
For. And why Alsace should have such a great Pinot Noir is another mystery to me, right? I mean, what is...
Well, in those days,
you'd think...
that when you bought a Pinot Noir in Alsace, it was barely a rosé.
I know, yeah.
Now they're making some amazing red wine, but they did that by going a little to the east, a little to the west, and seeing what was going on in Burgundy and coming back and strictly limiting yields and changing all the clones and everything.
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah.
Well, so that's all I can tell you about the Coury clone.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, Rusty Gaffney, the medical doctor who has a website called Prince of Pinot, did all the research that anybody could ever do, and I don't know that he actually figured it out either.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
You're now an observer to the wine industry.
I am an observer, yes.
And are you able to take some pride or vicarious pride in what has been accomplished?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I've ever thought about it that way. I'm sort of... I mean, it's a sort of a philosophical question. Does history make the man or man make the history? I think my business now is the wood ceiling business, and I read a book years ago called Megatrends by John Naisbat. He is a futurologist, and he made the observation in his book called High Tech, High Touch. And he observed that his thesis was that as humans move towards digital, virtual reality, this video, right, it's a digital, it's going to be watched digitally. humans actually need a counterbalance that's sensual, tactile, concrete, or they'll actually end up rejecting virtual digital reality. They can only handle so much. We are, after all, embodied souls.
We
so,
weren't all born with video.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so I think the cultural trend of wine and, wool and cotton and natural fibers and, going down to Lowe's and Home Depot and building something on the weekend, all these gardening. I think the wine industry is part of even larger than just Oregon. It's a cultural almost requirement to survive in a digital age, right? So to me, it was more like I see him more as surfing. You guys were surfers on this wave that was coming. I mean, wine was going to come, just like cigars and, all these good coffee. I mean, coffee is good now. It used to be terrible, right? So I see this more as, sort of more, you guys caught a wave. Did you create the wave? I don't know. For some reason, I don't see it that way. I see it more. My dad had the insight to see the wave, to catch the wave, just like beer. He caught that wave. He saw that he was in his own way a futurologist. He could see a wave, and sort of, yeah. He just had a hard time staying on the surfboard.
You used that analogy with your dad before?
No, never. I just came up with that one.
That's actually pretty good. My role with your father was often to sort of try to understand where he was trying to go and then go do the work. Yeah. And there were lots of incidents. I mean, the clonal one is the most obvious one, where I'm the one that went to Burgundy and to Alsace and the south of France and made contacts, and ultimately that resulted in legal importation of these clones. He had a lot of that vision, but for whatever reason, he wasn't going to do it. Yeah. And I'm sure. I mean, living with your father in any respect would result in arguments, no matter what. And so I'm sure there were some, but mostly I recall the amazing things that Chuck did for us, our winery, weeding our vineyard in the spring of '73 when we had no idea that we had to get the weeds out before they started growing, loaning me a filter when he was just starting collecting equipment in the brew business, and we had bottled a black Chardonnay, which clearly needed some help, and one of the things that it needed was a good filtration, and all those kinds of things that your father did that isn't necessarily what he's remembered for.
Yeah, right.
Because he's often. People were afraid of him from time to time.
Yeah. Well, he could be very overbearing. But you're right. He was actually a very generous person. It's kind of a strange, but yeah, he could be very generous. Yeah. As well as overbearing. Well, my dad, after he retired, he had neighbors that he could not get along with, and the guy somehow came at my dad, and so my dad sprayed him with his hose because he was out watering, and he sprayed him with the hose. So the guy called the cops on my dad, and they were basically both arrested. The neighbor and my dad, and so you could take anger management course and go away, or you could go to court. And my dad I'm going to court. So he went to court and he won. He was declared innocent, but he said to me, and then the young district attorney came up to me and put his hand on my shoulder and said to me, Mr. Coury, I don't want to see you in here again. My dad got a big kick out of that. Yeah, that's my dad.
I can't tell you what a pleasure it is to spend time with you. Well, because we don't all have the opportunity to think back to this period of in your case, the 60s and the early 70s for me, to understand what things were like at that point and how far we've come, and yet, as you just pointed out, we still need the high touch aspect of wine as much as we may have needed it back then to counter whatever else was going on in our lives.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, David, thank you for inviting me.
Yeah.
It's always, it's been a journey of memory for me, actually. It's amazing how, like the Mike Elwood, I thought, I don't know what that guy's name is, but I slept on it for a few nights and the name came to me.
Nice.
I hadn't thought of that it was amazing. So,
Here.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Congratulations to you.
Well,
yeah.
And to us.
Okay.